Ayoade's wedding beads snapped across the dirt the exact moment the old farmer lifted her veil. Laughter rippled through the crowded village compound. Her mother stood stiff with relief. Her brother would not meet her eyes. The guests had spent all morning whispering that Ayoade had been traded for debt, like a goat at market. Then the groom's rough hand paused beneath her chin. For one suspended second, Ayoade looked up into the face of the man they had forced her to marry, and her breath caught. Because behind the grey beard, bent shoulders, and weathered hat, his eyes were not old at all. They were young, sharp, watchful, and they were looking at her as if he knew this marriage was a trap. What would you do if your own family forced you to marry a man everyone called worthless, only for one glance to tell you the truth was far more dangerous than anyone imagined? Tell me your country and your local time in the comments. And if you love emotional, powerful stories filled with shocking twists, justice, and healing, subscribe and stay with me. The road to her husband's home seemed longer than any road Ayoade had ever traveled. The wedding songs had faded behind her. The last of the mocking laughter had died with the dust. Evening stretched across the fields in bands of amber and grey, and the motorcycle cart carrying her small box of clothes rattled over stones as if it too resented the journey. Ayoade sat in silence beside the man everyone called Bamidele. Up close the disguise was almost convincing. The grey beard looked coarse and neglected. His wrapper smelled faintly of dried grass and wood smoke. His shoulders stayed slightly bent, and one hand rested on a carved walking stick. To anyone watching, he was exactly what her family had promised, an aging farmer from the edge of nowhere, a man with no refinement, no city polish, no future worth envying. And yet nothing about him felt careless. He did not crowd her on the narrow bench. He did not speak to her the way men often did when they had paid for something and believed ownership had begun. He did not stare at her body. He did not smirk at her fear. When the cart lurched violently over a hole and Ayoade nearly fell, his hand shot out to steady her elbow, quick, firm, then gone, before the touch could become a claim. "Careful," he said. That one word unsettled her more than cruelty would have. His voice was roughened, lower than she expected, but not feeble. It carried restraint, awareness, as if he was measuring every syllable before letting it out. Ayoade stared ahead at the narrowing road. "You don't have to pretend kindness." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "And you don't have to pretend you are not afraid." The honesty of it tightened something inside her chest. She turned to him sharply, but he was looking toward the fields, not at her. The evening wind moved the dry maize leaves in silver waves. Goats crossed a distant footpath. Smoke rose from cooking fires scattered across the land. It should have been peaceful. Instead, the whole world felt like a doorway she had been pushed through without consent. "I am not afraid of poverty," she said. "No," he replied. "You are afraid of being trapped." Her fingers clenched around the edge of her wrapper. He had named it too precisely. Not poverty, not hard work. She knew both. She had scrubbed floors, sold fruit in the sun, gone hungry so her younger sister could eat. She was not afraid of difficulty. She was afraid of belonging to the wrong person. By the time they reached the farm, twilight had deepened into blue. Ayoade had expected ruin. She had expected a collapsing hut, muddy floors, sour smells, and the kind of neglect that lived in corners and on skin. What stood before her was modest, weathered, and plainly old, but not neglected. The small house had been repaired carefully. The roof was patched in even sections. Clay pots lined one side of the entrance. A hand pump stood nearby beside a clean basin. The yard had been swept. Neat rows of pepper okra and cassava stretched into the dark beyond the fence. Poor, yes, but tended. That detail unsettled her again. Bamidele stepped down first, leaning on his stick. He turned back and offered his hand. Ayoade ignored it and climbed down by herself. He did not seem offended. Inside the house was simple: a woven mat, a wooden table scrubbed smooth with age, 2 lanterns, shelves with neatly arranged tins and plates, a narrow hallway leading to what looked like 2 rooms. No photographs, no clutter, no trace of another woman having lived there, no sign of children. The place felt less like a home grown from years and more like a space prepared for necessity. "You can take that room," he said, pointing to the door on the left. "There is water in the clay pot for bathing. I brought fresh soap from the market." Ayoade looked at him with open suspicion. "And you, the other room?" She blinked. He lifted one shoulder, the motion oddly youthful despite the disguise. "You need rest more than you need another reason to hate me tonight." For the first time since the wedding, something close to confusion overtook her anger. Men did not marry women this way. Not where she came from. A forced marriage did not end with distance and a separate room. It ended with entitlement, with a locked door, with prayers whispered into pillows while pain did its work. "What game are you playing?" she asked. "No game." "Then why buy me?" His face did not change, but the air between them did. The lantern light sharpened the false lines on his skin. His beard cast shadows over his mouth. For one brief second, Ayoade thought she saw exhaustion, not guilt. "I did not ask for a frightened bride," he said quietly, "and I did not come looking for one." It was not an answer, but it was not nothing. He walked to the table and uncovered a plate. Steam still curled from boiled yam and pepper stew. Beside it sat a cup of hot ginger tea. Ayoade stared. "You cooked?" she asked before she could stop herself. "One of us had to." The answer would have sounded dry, almost amused, if not for the weariness beneath it. She should not have sat down. She should not have touched anything he provided. Pride told her to remain standing, to prove that being sold had not made her compliant. But the ride had been long, her head ached, and she had not eaten since dawn. So she sat. He stayed on the far side of the room, giving her space while she ate. He did not watch her. Instead, he busied himself checking the bolts on the back window, then adjusting a leak basin beneath a weak spot in the ceiling. The movements were efficient, precise, not the random shuffling of an old man preserving dignity. There was strength in the way he lifted the basin, control in the way he crossed the room. His hands were rough, but not clumsy. Ayoade noticed everything. When she finished eating, she took the plate to the basin automatically. He stopped her with a small shake of his head. "Leave it. I am not lazy. I did not say you were." "Then why?" "Because today has already taken enough from you." The words landed harder than she wanted them to. She set the plate down more carefully than necessary and turned away so he would not see the sudden burn in her eyes. In the small room he had given her, she found a folded wrapper, a clean nightdress, and a thick blanket laid neatly on the bed. The nightdress was plain cotton, but new. The wrapper was in her favorite color, deep blue. Her breath caught. No one in her family had noticed her preferences in years. Not since life had become one long chain of survival and sacrifice. Yet here in a strange house with a strange husband, someone had chosen blue. Ayoade touched the fabric slowly. How? She bathed in silence, changed, and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the house settle around her. Outside, insects sang in the dark. Somewhere far off, a dog barked. Then came thunder. Rain began as a whisper and became a downpour in less than a minute. She went to the window. The yard disappeared behind silver sheets. Wind battered the side of the house. One shutter banged violently. Before she could move, Bamidele crossed the yard through the storm and secured it from outside. He moved too fast, not just strong, fast. He returned drenched shoulders, straight steps, long and sure. And when he reached the doorway, not knowing she was watching through the cracked curtain, he did something that sent cold awareness down her spine. He stopped. Then with one impatient exhale, he rolled his neck and stood fully upright. No stoop, no tremble, no old man's stiffness. His back was straight, his frame broad. The silhouette under the wet clothes was nothing like the one he wore in daylight. For 2 stunned heartbeats, the disguise vanished not from his face, but from his body. Ayoade stepped back from the window so quickly the bed frame creaked. Outside her door his footsteps paused. Silence. Then came 3 light knocks. "The roof in your room may leak near the corner," he said through the wood, his voice once again slower, rougher, older. "Move the basket if the water starts coming in." She stared at the door, pulse hammering. He knew she had seen something. Or perhaps he did not know. Perhaps that was worse. She did not answer. After a moment, his footsteps moved away. Ayoade waited until the house went quiet. Then she opened her door a fraction and looked down the dim hallway. A lantern still burned in the main room. She could hear him moving softly, then not at all. She should have slept. Instead, she slipped barefoot into the corridor. The air smelled of rain and kerosene. Her heart beat so loudly she was sure he would hear it. She passed the table, the stacked plates, the walking stick leaning against the wall. Then she saw it. At the far end of this hall beyond his room was another door, narrow, iron-bolted, different from the rest of the house. Locked. A strange chill moved through her. Why would a poor farmer need a room like that? She took one more step. Behind her a floorboard groaned. Ayoade spun around. Bamidele stood in the darkness near the lantern, half his face hidden in shadow. The beard was still there. The bent posture had returned. But now that she had seen the break in it, she could not unsee the lie. His gaze flicked once toward the locked door, then back to her. Neither of them spoke. And in that breathless silence, Ayoade understood the one truth more dangerous than the marriage itself. The man her family had forced her to marry was hiding far more than his age. The storm did not ease before dawn. Rain drummed against the roof for hours, turning the yard into dark, glistening mud and filling the silence between Ayoade and her husband with something heavier than fear. She returned to her room after he caught her near the locked door, but sleep never truly came. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw it again, the straightening of his back, the speed of his movements, the split second when the old man had vanished and someone else had stood in his place. Someone younger, someone dangerous, someone hidden. By morning, the rain had weakened to a soft, stubborn drizzle. Ayoade stepped into the main room, expecting to find him waiting, perhaps angry, perhaps ready to invent some thin excuse for what she had seen. Instead, the house was empty. A pot of porridge sat warming near the fire. Beside it lay a folded note. "Eat first. We will speak when I return." No name, no apology, no explanation. Her jaw tightened. He still thought he could control the timing of truth. Ayoade ate only a few spoonfuls before setting the bowl down. The note should have calmed her. It did the opposite. Men who planned conversations were men who believed they could manage outcomes. Men who chose the moment of truth usually did so because the full truth was worse than the lie. She paced the room once, twice, then stopped at the far end of the hallway. The locked door was still there, still silent, still wrong. She knew she should leave it alone. She knew curiosity could be the same thing as stepping into a snake's path. But something inside her had changed the moment she realized she had not been married to what she had been told. Deception had already entered the house before she did. Whatever she discovered now would not be the first betrayal. It would only name it. Ayoade knelt by the bolt and tested it gently. Iron. Strong. No give. Then her eyes moved to the floor. The faintest scrape marks curved near the bottom of the door as if heavy objects had been dragged in and out. Not farm tools. Too smooth for that. Too controlled. She leaned closer. There, near the threshold, caught in the wood grain, a torn corner of black material. not cloth. Leather. Expensive leather. Her pulse jumped. She tucked the tiny piece into her wrapper just as footsteps sounded outside. Ayoade stood and backed away from the door only a moment before Bamidele entered through the front. He carried cassava leaves in one hand and a sack of feed in the other. Rain darkened his shoulders. His walking stick hung from his wrist rather than supporting his weight. The moment he saw where she stood, his expression changed only slightly, but enough. Enough for her to know he missed nothing. "You did not eat much," he said. "You did not answer much." He set the sack down without a sound. "I said we would speak, and I am tired of waiting for men to decide when I deserve answers." That landed. For one suspended second, neither moved. The drizzle tapped lightly at the shutters. The fire crackled. Something tightened in his face, not anger but recognition. Perhaps shame. Perhaps memory. He laid the leaves on the table and looked at her fully. "You should not have been brought into this house that way," he said. "That way," she repeated, her voice rising. "Sold, lied to, married to a stranger wearing another man's face. Which part are you speaking about?" His eyes sharpened. There it was again, that impossible, watchful stillness beneath the disguise. All of it. Ayoade gave a hollow laugh. "At least you know what you did." He flinched so slightly she almost doubted she saw it. "No," he said, "I know what was done." The words were careful. Too careful. She stepped closer. "Then say it plainly. Who are you?" He did not answer. Her anger, held in place by exhaustion and confusion, snapped all at once. She reached for his beard. The movement shocked even her, but she was faster than hesitation now. Her fingers caught the edge of the grey hair just below his jaw and pulled hard. The false beard shifted. Not much, but enough. He caught her wrist instantly, not like an old man, like someone trained never to be surprised twice. His grip was firm, controlled, effortless. Ayoade froze, eyes flashing to his face. The beard had loosened on one side. Beneath the wrinkled makeup at his jaw, she saw smooth brown skin, young skin. His eyes closed for a moment as if some final door inside him had just given way. Then he released her wrist, slowly, without force, without excuse. "Lock the front door," he said quietly. Ayoade did not move. "Why?" "Because once I tell you, you will understand why I never wanted you near that room." His voice had changed. Not the rough, aged drawl he used outside. This was lower, cleaner, stronger, the voice of the man hidden under the performance. Every part of her body went cold. Still, she crossed the room and slid the bolt into place. When she turned back, he had already taken off the hat. The grey hair beneath it came away next. He dropped the wig onto the table. Ayoade's breath stopped. Without the hat and false hair, his face altered at once. The years fell away first from his forehead, then from the lines around his eyes. He peeled at the edge of the darkened latex near his temples, then along his cheeks. Piece by piece, the age dissolved. What emerged beneath it was not merely younger, it was striking. He was tall, even while half-relaxed, broad-shouldered, with the kind of stillness that made the room rearrange itself around him. His face was sharply cut, his mouth firm, his jaw clean beneath the last of the glue. A faint scar traced one side of his chin. His eyes, those impossible eyes, were exactly what she had seen at the altar, young, alert, intelligent, and burdened. Ayoade took one step back, then another. The man before her could not have been more than 32, maybe younger. He watched her carefully, as though the wrong movement might break something neither of them knew how to repair. "My name is not Bamidele," he said. She said nothing. He swallowed once. "My name is Adewale Afolayan." The name meant nothing to her for half a second. Then it did. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. Afolayan. She had heard it before on the radio, in market gossip, in the mouths of men who discussed land contracts, seed investments, trucking routes, power deals. Afolayan was not a village name. It was the kind of name that sat on buildings and shook ministries. Her face drained. He saw the recognition and exhaled like a man who had run out of lesser lies. "Yes," he said. "That Afolayan." Ayoade stared at him, horror and disbelief crashing together so violently she almost laughed again. "No." "Yes." "No." She shook her head hard. "No, you do not get to stand there looking like that, wearing another life, and say a name like that as if it explains anything. It explains only why the disguise exists. Then explain the marriage." His jaw tightened. For the first time since removing the mask, he looked less like a man in control and more like a man choosing which wound to reopen first. "I needed the farm," he said. "I needed this place to remain invisible. Your uncle brokered the arrangement through people who were not supposed to know my real identity. I was told a family needed money, and a daughter would agree." Ayoade's eyes burned. "Agree, I know." "Do you?" she snapped. "Do you know what it means for a woman to be dressed and delivered like a debt payment? Do you know what it feels like to sit before everyone you ever fed, served, or respected, and realize they all came to watch your life be buried?" His gaze dropped for one short moment. "More than you think." The answer was strange enough to stop her, but only for a moment. "So you let it happen anyway." "I thought I could keep distance. I thought I could protect you better once you were here than if I refused and left you with those people after money had already changed hands." The room went still. It was the first explanation that sounded dangerously close to truth. Ayoade hated that. "Do not dress selfishness as rescue," she said. "I am not asking you to forgive it." "Good, because I do not." He nodded once, accepting the blow without defense. Thunder murmured in the distance. Rainwater slipped from the roof in steady threads. Adewale moved to the table and pulled open a drawer beneath it. From inside he took a small ring of keys. When he looked up again, the reserve in his face had changed into decision. "There is more," he said, "and after this you may decide whether you stay in this house, leave it, or hate me from inside it." He crossed the hallway. Ayoade followed despite every warning in her body. At the locked door he chose the smallest key. The iron bolt clicked. He opened it inward. The room beyond was nothing like the rest of the house. No rough walls, no humble storage, no farm clutter. Inside stood metal cases, a polished desk maps spread across one wall, 2 phones, a laptop, files, clean boots, and a locked cabinet. A solar battery hummed softly near the corner. On another wall hung photographs of men in suits, newspaper clippings, route charts, and red-marked names. This was not a hidden room for comfort. It was a war room. Ayoade stepped across the threshold in stunned silence. Adewale did not come too close. "There are people looking for me," he said. "People who believe I am dead, missing, or too weak to return. I let them believe what suited me." She turned slowly toward him. "Why?" His face hardened, not with coldness, but with something darker. "Because someone murdered the man who raised me," he said. "And before he died, he warned me that the next burial would be mine." Ayoade felt the air leave her lungs. He went on, voice low and precise. "So I disappeared. I became older, smaller, harmless. I let greedy men speak freely around me. I let traitors forget how closely I used to listen." The walls seemed to shift around her. This was bigger than deceit in marriage, bigger than one family's cruelty, bigger than a disguised husband in a village house. Ayoade looked at the files again, at the names, at the photographs, at the map marked with routes between farms, warehouses, and cities. Then her gaze landed on one document left half covered on the desk, a ledger page. and on it, circled in red ink, was a name she knew. Chief Gideofor, her uncle. Her blood went ice cold. She lifted the page with shaking fingers. Adewale saw the name and said nothing because he did not need to. At last Ayoade looked up at him, the last of her certainty, shattering into something far more dangerous. This marriage had not only trapped her beside a stranger, it had placed her in the center of a war her own family had already entered. For a long time, neither of them spoke after Ayoade saw her uncle's name on the ledger. Rain tapped softly on the roof above the hidden room. The solar battery hummed in the corner. Somewhere beyond the walls, the fields stretched under grey, morning light, as if the world outside still belonged to ordinary people with ordinary troubles. But inside that narrow space, ordinary life had ended. Ayoade lowered the paper slowly. "Chief Gideofor," she said, barely above a whisper. "My mother's elder brother." Adewale watched her with a stillness that now frightened her in a different way. Not because he was pretending anymore, but because he was not. "Yes, you investigated him. I followed transactions, land transfers, ghost contracts, and routes used to move money through farm cooperatives that did not exist." His tone stayed level. His name appeared more than once. Ayoade stared at the page again. "For what?" "For helping powerful men hide theft in the language of agriculture," Adewale said. "For shifting assets before audits. For purchasing silence. For introducing desperate families to private arrangements that benefited everyone except the daughters involved." Her stomach turned. The room blurred for a second. She braced one hand against the desk, breathing through the wave of nausea. Pieces of the past began sliding into place with cruel precision. The sudden money that appeared when there should have been none, the way her uncle always arrived, smiling during crises, the strange interest he took in marriages, debts, and opportunities, the conversations that stopped when she entered. It had never been generosity. It had been trade. Adewale stepped forward as if to steady her, then stopped himself. The restraint hurt almost as much as the truth. "I am sorry," he said. The words snapped something in her. "Do not say sorry like you are outside this." She looked up, eyes burning. "You married me while investigating my family." His face tightened, but he did not deny it. "I told you before, I did not know it would be you until the arrangement was already moving, but you still let it happen." "I did." "Why?" He held her gaze. "Because once your uncle's people knew I was interested in the farm, refusing the marriage would have exposed too much too quickly. And because I believed that bringing you here gave me at least some control over what happened next." Ayoade let out a bitter laugh. "Control. That is always the word men use when women pay the price." The strike landed. She saw it in the slight shift of his mouth, the brief flare in his eyes, not anger, but recognition. He knew she was right, or right enough to wound him. "What do you want me to say?" he asked quietly. "That I had no choices, I did. None of them were clean." "No," she said. "I want you to say that my life was not a useful sacrifice." For the first time, he had no answer at all. Silence expanded between them. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it left her more tired than before. Ayoade set the ledger down with trembling fingers and moved past him, out of the hidden room, back into the dim hallway. She needed air, but the house suddenly felt full of truths waiting in corners. In the main room, she stood by the window and watched the drizzle fade over the cassava rows. Behind her, Adewale closed the hidden door but did not lock it. That too meant something. He was done pretending she could not see behind walls. "Say the rest," she said, without turning around. His footsteps stopped a few feet behind her. "There are men inside Afolayan group who believe they have already divided what they will take," he said. "My father, my adoptive father, built a network across farming, storage, transport, and agricultural technology. He invested in people the banks ignored. He believed food systems could protect communities from the worst kind of dependence. When he realized money was leaking, land was being stripped, and shell companies were multiplying, he started tracing the pattern quietly. Ayoade listened without moving. He was killed before he could go public. Adewale continued. The official report called it an accident on a rural inspection route. I buried him knowing it was murder. She turned then. The grief in his face was not dramatic. It was quieter than that, settled deep, old enough to have hardened into discipline, but not old enough to stop hurting. And you hid, she said. I disappeared. To survive. To investigate. The correction was gentle, but she caught the steel inside it. He went on. I let a few people think I was broken. I let others think I had fled. Meanwhile, I took small properties tied to old supply routes and used them as listening points. This farm was one of them. Ayoade's eyes narrowed. And my family, connected by greed before they were connected by design, he said. Your uncle became useful because he knew who was desperate, who needed cash, who would sell land, who would sell loyalty, who would sell blood if you named the right price. Blood. The word hit too precisely. Ayoade wrapped her arms around herself. You make it sound like we are all for sale. No, Adewale said. I make it sound like the men around your uncle believe everyone is. She hated how carefully he separated her from them. Hated it because part of her wanted that separation. Another part did not believe she had earned it. And now she asked, what happens now that I know? That depends on what you choose. She turned fully toward him. What choices do I actually have? A faint, humorless smile touched his mouth. More than you had yesterday. It was a small thing, but it slowed her anger just enough for exhaustion to break through. Yesterday she had been sold. Today she was standing inside a hidden operations room with a man who looked nothing like the one at the altar, learning that her uncle might be tied to murder and financial crimes large enough to swallow entire communities. Nothing in her life had prepared her for this. Yet strangely, the shock was beginning to make one thing clearer. The cruelty she had grown up around had never been random. It had structure. It had beneficiaries. It had names. Adewale glanced toward the kitchen area. You need food. I need truth. You need both. She almost snapped at him again. Instead, to her own annoyance, she said, I am not hungry. That has never stopped a body from failing. The answer was practical, irritating, and so unadorned that she found herself too tired to resist it. He moved toward the table and began cutting onions and tomatoes with quick, efficient strokes. Not like a servant trying to impress, not like a wealthy man playing humility, like someone who had learned to care for himself because trusting others had become expensive. Ayoade watched in silence. How long have you been pretending? She asked at last. Months here, longer elsewhere. Does no one know a few people? Fewer than should. And your former fiancé? The question came out before she meant to ask it. She had seen a woman in one of the clippings pinned inside the hidden room, elegant and severe beside Adewale at some old public event. His knife paused once against the board. That part of my life is over. Not enough, she thought. Not nearly enough. But there was something in his face that warned her not to press yet. He cooked quickly, pepper stew again richer this time, rice from a sealed tin, hot tea with cloves. While he worked, Ayoade moved almost without thinking to the back window, where she noticed a torn sack covering a draft near the frame. It will leak when the next storm comes, she said. I know. You should replace the hinge before it warps. He looked over at her, surprised. You know carpentry, I know houses that survive, because women notice what men overlook. That earned the smallest real change in his expression. Not a smile. Something rarer. Respect, perhaps. They ate facing each other across the worn table. No disguise, no false beard, no walking stick within reach. The absence of those things made the room feel startlingly intimate, almost dangerous in its honesty. After a few bites, Ayoade said, "If my uncle is involved, my mother may know more than she admits." Adewale did not rush to answer. "I considered that." "And Kunle?" she asked, thinking of her brother's slippery eyes, his quick temper, his constant need. "He is weak, but weakness is easily hired." "Yes," Adewale said. "Weak men are often the first to become useful." The words should have felt cruel. Instead, they felt accurate. Ayoade set down her spoon. "If I stay here and do nothing, Temalola is still with them." He met her gaze at once. "I know." There it was, the real wound beneath everything else. Her sister. Small, bright, trusting Temalola still inside that house of bargains and threats. Ayoade's throat tightened. "My mother has already begun training her to obey too quickly, to smile when men speak, to lower her eyes. I used to think it was how mothers protected daughters. Now I see it may be how they prepare them." Adewale's voice changed when he answered softer than before. "Then she comes first." Ayoade stared at him. "You would help me bring her out?" "Yes, even if it risks your investigation." He did not hesitate. Some things deserve risk. That should not have mattered. Not after everything. Not after the lies, the marriage, the manipulation wrapped in strategy. But it did matter, because for the first time since her wedding day, a man had placed her sister's safety above his own plans without bargaining first. Something inside Ayoade shifted small, cautious, dangerous in its own way. Not trust, not yet, but the first crack in absolute refusal. Outside, the rain finally stopped. A weak strip of sunlight broke through the clouds and touched the fields. The house, which had felt like a trap, now felt like a boundary line between two worlds, the one that had used her and the one she did not yet understand. Adewale rose to clear the table. "There is a women's cooperative meeting near the Eastern Well this afternoon," he said. "A seed distribution issue. I usually attend as Bamidele." Ayoade looked up sharply. "You are putting the disguise back on." "I have to." She hated the thought instantly. The beard, the bent shoulders, the lie reassembled in front of her. And yet the work outside those walls was real. "What do you do there?" she asked. "Listen. Help when I can without becoming visible." She stood. "Then I am coming." Adewale's brows drew together. "That is not wise. Neither was marrying me under a false name." His mouth tightened. "If the women know me as your wife," Ayoade said, "I can watch what you cannot. I can hear what men stop saying when men approach. And if my family or my uncle are using the cooperative routes for anything dirty, village women will know before accountants do." He studied her for a long moment. This time when he spoke, there was no protective command in his tone. Only honest assessment. "You would be walking into danger." Ayoade lifted her chin. "I have been living in it for years. I just know its real name now." For the first time since morning, Adewale nodded, as if he was no longer speaking to a victim he must shield, but to a partner he would be foolish to underestimate. And in that quiet nod, the marriage forced upon her began changing into something neither of them had planned. A test of character neither could survive alone. By late afternoon, the village had already begun speaking about Bamidele's new wife. Women at the Eastern Well greeted Ayoade with the sharp curiosity reserved for strangers whose pain had arrived before they did. Some smiled out of politeness. Others looked at her with pity so open it almost felt like insult. A few examined Adewale in his old man disguise, and then glanced back at Ayoade as if silently asking the same question everyone else had asked on her wedding day. How much had her family been paid? Ayoade stood beside the seed sacks with a calm face and a straight back. If humiliation wanted her again, it would have to work harder. Adewale, bent once more beneath grey hair and weathered skin, played his role perfectly. He spoke slowly, listened more than he talked, and asked practical questions about crop rot, delayed deliveries, and irrigation pump repairs. The women responded to him easily. They knew Bamidele the farmer. They trusted him enough to complain openly in his presence. Ayoade stayed quiet at first, absorbing names, habits, grievances, and patterns. Then she noticed it. Each time the cooperative funds were mentioned, one name came up with careful hesitation. Chief Gideofor. Sometimes it appeared wrapped in gratitude, sometimes in unease, always in lowered voices. He said he would help us register for the subsidy. He promised storage access if we signed early. He took copies of our papers himself. Some bags never arrived, but they said the records showed full delivery. Ayoade kept her face still, while ice moved slowly through her chest. After the meeting, as the women dispersed with smaller sacks and larger worries, an older woman with a blue head wrap lingered behind. Her name, Ayoade had learned, was Mama Saad. Her hands were thick with age and labor. Her gaze, though, was razor-sharp. She waited until the others were gone before speaking. "You are not afraid enough," Mama Sade said. Ayoade blinked. "Excuse me." The older woman nodded toward Adewale, who was helping a widow load cassava cuttings onto a cart. "That man is either safer than he looks or far more dangerous. Maybe both. But that is not what I mean." "Then what do you mean?" Mama Sade leaned in slightly. "You are asking questions with your eyes." Ayoade said nothing. "And girls who ask questions around men like your uncle," the woman went on, "either learn to hide it fast or they disappear into marriages, debts, and apologies." The words struck like a slap. Ayoade forced herself not to look startled. "You know my uncle." "I know the smell of polished greed," Mama Sade said dryly. "Chief Gideofor wears it like perfume." Before Ayoade could ask more, the older woman straightened and took her sack. "Protect your younger sister," she added. "That one still has light in her face." Then she walked away. All the air seemed to leave Ayoade at once. Temalola. The warning hit harder because it confirmed what had already been clawing at her mind. Ayoade had told herself she would wait, gather facts, move carefully. But patience became more difficult each hour she imagined her sister still trapped in that house, still smiling too quickly when ordered, still being trained to mistake obedience for safety. That evening on the walk back to the farm, the sky glowed bronze over the fields. Village boys chased a tire along the road. Goats clustered near thorn fences. Everything looked ordinary, but Ayoade's pulse kept racing as though danger were walking openly beside them. When they reached the yard, she turned to Adewale before he could remove the disguise. "I'm going home tomorrow." He stilled. "That is a bad idea. I wasn't asking permission, and I am not trying to control you." She almost laughed at the irony. "Really?" A trace of pain crossed his face beneath the false wrinkles. "Fair." He stepped into the house and shut the door behind them. Only then did he pull off the hat and loosen the beard. The transformation no longer shocked her the way it had before, but it still changed the air around him. Each time the old farmer disappeared, the room seemed to remember it had been lying. Adewale faced her fully. "If you go back without a reason they accept, they will become cautious. I have a reason. I am still their dutiful daughter in their minds. They will expect me to come with gifts, apologies, and questions about how much money they can squeeze next. That will get you inside," he said. "Not necessarily back out." Ayoade's voice sharpened. "Temalola is there." He was quiet for a moment. "Then we do it properly." Yes," she folded her arms. "You cannot walk into that house as yourself." "No. But I do not need to." Something in his tone made her narrow her eyes. "What are you planning?" "Observation first," he said. "You go in. I stay near enough to intervene if it turns ugly. You do not confront anyone unless you are sure. You listen. You look. You bring back what they reveal when they think they still own you. Ayoade wanted to reject the plan on principle. She wanted to say she needed no one. But that would have been pride, not wisdom. And she was beginning to understand how often women were punished for being forced to choose between the two. So she nodded once. The next morning she dressed in the plainest wrapper she owned and tied a faded scarf over her hair. She carried a basket with smoked fish palm oil and yams, just enough to look dutiful, not enough to look prosperous. Adewale watched her from the doorway as she adjusted the basket on her hip. "You remember the signal?" he asked. "If I ask for water twice, it means I need to leave immediately. And if you say Temalola should visit the farm, it means she is in direct danger." He nodded. "Good." Ayoade met his gaze. "If something happens, do not wait for permission." "I won't." The road back to her family's house felt shorter than the one that had carried her away as a bride. Maybe that was because now she was walking toward something she had already lost the illusion of. Their compound looked the same. The cracked wall, the leaning gate, the washing line tangled with old wrappers and shirts. A chicken scratched near the doorway. Kunle's abandoned motorbike lay tilted under the mango tree. Yet the place no longer felt like home. It felt like a market stall after closing something used too often for bargaining. Her mother Ireti opened the door. For one dazzling, dishonest second, joy flooded the older woman's face. "Ayoade," she cried, pulling her inside. "You came. I told them you would come. I said my daughter knows where her blood belongs." Ayoade nearly recoiled at the embrace. Not because it was weak, because it was practiced. Inside her father, Sanya looked up from a plastic chair, his expression sharpening immediately with calculation. Kunle lounged near the window, one leg bouncing, trying and failing to appear casual. And Temalola rose so fast from the floor mat that her sewing needle dropped. "Auntie," she breathed, then rushed into Ayoade's arms with such desperate force that Ayoade's chest hurt. There it was. The first real thing in the whole room. Ayoade held her sister tightly. Temalola had grown thinner in only a few days. Not dramatically, just enough for a loving eye to notice. And Ayoade's eye noticed everything now. "I brought fish," Ayoade said, forcing steadiness into her voice. Her mother clapped in false delight. "You see, marriage has already taught her sense." Kunle smirked. "Or maybe the old man is wealthier than he looks." There it was. No greeting, no shame, straight to money. Ayoade set the basket down and smiled faintly the way she used to when surviving required softness. "I thought you would ask if I'm well." Kunle shrugged. "If you came walking, you must be." Her father finally spoke. "Sit. Tell us about your husband. Not your marriage, not your feelings, not whether you were treated gently. Your husband, which meant his land, his money, his weaknesses, his use." Ayoade sat carefully. Temalola pressed close against her side. "What do you want to know?" she asked. Her mother leaned forward too quickly. "How much land does he truly have? Who visits him? Does he keep cash inside the house or in town? Does he drink?" "Men who drink speak carelessly." Ayoade's stomach hardened into stone. For a split second she could not speak. Then she laughed softly. All three of them looked startled. "I was gone less than a week," she said, "and this is how fast concern turns into inventory." Her mother's face changed. The warmth cracked. "Do not be disrespectful." "Why not?" Ayoade asked. "You sold me respectfully. Should I be grateful respectfully too?" Silence fell like a blade. Kunle rose first, fury flashing across his face. "Watch your mouth." "No," she snapped, standing too. "You watch yours. You stood there while they dressed me for slaughter." His hand twitched. Temalola flinched. Ayoade saw it and went cold all over. Not fear. Clarity. This had happened before. Maybe not to her sister's face, but near enough. Often enough. Temalola had learned to brace before the blow came. Ayoade turned slowly toward her mother. Has he touched her? Iretti's eyes widened with offended rage. How dare you accuse your brother in this house? That was not a denial. Ayoade looked at her father. And you? Sanya's jaw hardened. Do not bring shame here. Still not a denial. The world inside her seemed to tilt. Then her uncle's voice sounded from the doorway. Now this Chief Gideofor said smoothly, stepping inside, in a cream-colored Agbada gold ring flashing at his finger, is not how a married daughter should greet her family. Ayoade turned. He smiled at her like a man admiring livestock that had gained value since purchase. Every instinct in her screamed, and then she saw what lay tucked beneath his arm, a slim red file stamped with the seal of a marriage registrar's office. He followed her gaze. His smile widened. Ah, he said, perhaps this is not the right moment to discuss Temalola's future. Ayoade's blood roared in her ears. Her little sister looked up in confusion, and in that instant every last doubt died. They had not learned from selling one daughter. They were already preparing to sell the next. Ayoade did not remember crossing the room. 1 second she was standing beside Temalola, her pulse roaring so loudly she could barely hear. The next she had reached Chief Gideofor and snatched the red file from beneath his arm before anyone could stop her. Ayoade, her mother shouted, but Ayoade had already opened it. Inside were copies of identification papers, a typed agreement, 2 passport photographs of Temalola taken without her knowledge, and a handwritten note listing gifts, family support, and a bride settlement amount large enough to feed the household for months. At the bottom was a name Ayoade did not know, an older businessman from Ibadan with 3 children and a dead wife. Temalola made a small broken sound beside her. The room exploded. Kunla lunged first, trying to rip the file from Ayoade's hands. She twisted away, clutching it to her chest. Her father rose with a curse. Her mother rushed toward Temalola, grabbing the girl's wrist as if fear itself might make her run. And Chief Gideofor did not rush at all. He simply closed the door behind him. That scared Ayoade more than the shouting, because men who remained calm in chaos usually did so because they believed the outcome still belonged to them. A married woman should have learned by now, he said smoothly, that family matters are not discussed with such drama. Ayoade stared at him in open hatred. You were going to sell her too. His smile barely moved. Mind your language. No one is selling anyone. We are arranging security, respectability, a future. Temalola began to cry silently. That sound the one children make when they have learned not to cry too loudly stripped the last restraint from Ayoade's voice. You call this a future? She shouted. You called mine a future too, a bargain wrapped in church songs and shame. Her father slammed a hand against the table. Enough! No, Ayoade snapped, turning on him. Not enough. Never enough. That is the problem with all of you. One daughter was not enough. One lie was not enough. One betrayal was not enough. Kunla stepped closer, face dark with anger and embarrassment. Give the file back. Or what she demanded. His silence answered badly enough. Temalola gasped when he took another step, and then from outside the compound came the sharp sound of a motorcycle backfiring. It was ordinary, probably accidental. But Ayoade saw the flicker in Chief Gideofor's eyes and knew at once it was not meaningless to him. He was not working alone today. The realization struck hard and fast. Whatever this meeting had been, whatever arrangement this file represented, there were other eyes nearby. Other hands ready if persuasion failed. Ayoade folded the file shut and grabbed Temalola's hand. She is coming with me. Her mother's grip tightened painfully on Temalola's other arm. She is not! Temalola cried out. Ayoade yanked her sister toward her with all the force fury gave her. For one terrible second, the girl was caught between them, dragged like property exactly the way Ayoade had feared. Chief Gideofor's voice cut through the struggle. "Let the child go," he said. Everyone froze. Not because he sounded loud, because he sounded absolute. He looked at Ayoade with polished patience. "If she leaves now, your husband's little farm will not remain peaceful for long." The words were mild. The threat inside them was not. Ayoade went still. He knew. Maybe not everything. Maybe not Adewale's full identity. But enough to link the farm, the marriage, and some larger suspicion he was still circling like a vulture. Her mind began racing. If she pulled Temalola out now, they might send men after them before she even reached the road. If she stayed, Temalola remained in a house already measuring her like livestock. If she exposed too much, she could lead danger straight back to Adewale before he was ready. Chief Gideofor saw the calculation in her face and smiled softly like a teacher pleased by a slow student finally learning. "That is better," he said. "Think before you spoil things." Ayoade wanted to claw that smile off his face. Instead, she forced herself to breathe once, twice. Then she did the hardest thing she had ever done. She loosened her hold on Temalola's wrist. Not completely. Just enough. And in a voice that shook only a little, she said, "Temalola should visit the farm next week. The air there is cleaner." For half a heartbeat, no one reacted, but she knew what she had done. The phrase was the signal. If Adewale's watcher was close enough, if he had stayed where they agreed, he would understand at once. Direct danger. Move soon. Temalola looked at her with confused, wet eyes. Ayoade squeezed her hand once, praying the girl would hold on to the only truth that mattered. "Now I see what they are doing. I am not leaving you behind." Chief Gideofor's gaze sharpened. Perhaps he sensed the sentence had carried more than it seemed. But before he could press, a new voice floated in from outside. "Madam Ireti." A neighbor. Then another voice louder. "Is everything all right? We heard shouting." The room changed instantly. Like actors hearing the audience arrive, everyone shifted back into their moral costumes. Her mother released Temalola first and smoothed her wrapper. Her father stepped away from the table. Kunle muttered a curse under his breath and turned toward the wall. Chief Gideofor's smile returned in full, warm, and respectable. Ayoade understood then why evil survived so easily in families like hers, because it knew how to look decent the moment witnesses came near. Her mother opened the door with a shaky laugh. "Family discussion," she said. Nothing more. Two women from the next compound peered in. One of them was curious. The other looked worried. Ayoade saw temptation flash through her like lightning. She could speak now. She could shout. She could hold up the file and call the whole street to witness what was being done to Temalola. But another thought struck even faster. If she exposed everything in this moment, Chief Gideofor would destroy evidence, reposition allies, and make himself the victim before sunset. Men like him survived scandal by feeding on confusion. No. She needed proof timing and a clean blade, not a wild swing. So Ayoade smiled tightly and said, "I missed my sister. That is all." The women lingered unsatisfied, then drifted away. When the door shut again, the house felt smaller than ever. Chief Gideofor adjusted his cuff. "You see, there is no need for madness." Ayoade looked straight at him. "One day that smile will fail you." He chuckled. "By then I will be too rich to care." He took the file from her hands before she could stop him, slow and certain, like a man reclaiming what he already owned. Then he turned to Temalola. "Get changed," he said. "You will greet visitors tomorrow." Temalola went white. Ayoade moved before thought could stop her. "Tomorrow?" This time even her mother looked uneasy. A flicker only. But enough. Chief Gideofor answered without shame. "The family must move efficiently. Delay creates gossip." Ayoade understood the deeper meaning at once. They were accelerating the process because she had seen too much. Her chest tightened so violently, she thought she might choke. Then Kunle spoke from near the window, trying for bravado and landing closer to panic. "Why are we all acting as if this is strange?" It worked before. The room fell silent. He realized what he had said too late. Ayoade turned slowly toward him. Her mother closed her eyes. Her father looked away. And in that awful stillness, the truth expanded into its full ugliness. It worked before. Not just with her. Before her too, maybe. With cousins. With girls whispered about, then vanished into marriages no one asked questions about. Gideofor had not built a business from one daughter's suffering. This was a system. A pipeline. Respectability on the outside, trafficking by custom on the inside. Ayoade's hands began to shake, but her voice came out strangely calm. "How many?" No one answered. She took one step toward Kunle. "How many girls?" Still silence. Chief Gideofor's pleasant face hardened at last. "You are becoming hysterical." "No," Ayoade said. "I am becoming useful." The sentence landed harder than shouting. For the first time, real caution entered his eyes. He moved toward her, not fast, but with intent. "Go back to your husband," he said quietly. "Be grateful your own arrangement landed softer than others. Do not force me to remember that mercy has limits." Mercy. The word nearly made her laugh in his face. Instead, she met his gaze and said, "You should pray yours does." Then she turned, took Temalola's face in both hands, and kissed her forehead. "I will come back," she whispered. Temalola clutched her desperately. "Please don't leave me." The plea nearly broke her. Ayoade drew back before her own tears could betray the plan forming behind her eyes. She looked once at her mother, once at her father, and saw nothing there that resembled rescue. Only fear, greed, weakness, and the habits of people who had chosen complicity so long they mistook it for survival. When she stepped out of the compound, the evening light hit her face like heat from another world. At the bend in the road near the old mango seller's stand, a battered delivery truck idled beside 2 goats and a stack of feed sacks. No one else would have looked twice. But Ayoade recognized the driver's posture before she saw his eyes. Adewale. Still disguised, still bent, still watching. The moment she reached the truck, he read the answer in her face. "It's worse," she said. He opened the passenger door at once. Ayoade climbed in, breath-shaking hands cold. As the truck pulled away from the road, she turned back once and saw Chief Gideofor standing at the compound gate, small in the distance, robes bright in the dusty light. He was watching the road, watching her leave. And Ayoade knew with sudden certainty that the next move would not belong only to her or her family anymore. Because now that she had seen the machine from inside, the machine would come for her too. The truck did not stop until the village lights had disappeared behind them. Adewale drove in silence for several minutes, one hand loose on the wheel, the other resting near the gear shift. Outside, dusk thickened over the roadside trees. Motorcycles flashed past in bursts of headlight and dust. Somewhere in the back, empty feed tins rattled each time the truck hit a rut. The disguise was still on him. Grey beard, bent shoulders, tired wrapper, but Ayoade could feel the real man underneath it now, the way one feels a blade inside cloth. He glanced at her once. "Tell me everything." Ayoade tried. The first words came out sharp and fast, then tangled with rage. She told him about the red file, the passport photographs, the price written beside Temalola's future, as if it were the cost of roofing sheets. She told him what Chief Gideofor said, how calm he had been, how dangerous that calm felt. She repeated Kunle's careless sentence exactly. It worked before. When she finished, the truck had gone so quiet that even the engine seemed to listen. Adewale's jaw hardened beneath the false beard. "How many girls?" he asked. "I don't know." Ayoade pressed both palms against her knees to stop them shaking. But it is not just me. It was never just me. No, he said. It wasn't. His voice had flattened into something colder than anger. Calculation. Resolve. The kind that frightened enemies and comforted no one. They reached the farm, and he killed the engine without another word. Inside the house, he stripped off the disguise piece by piece in the main room. The beard landed on the table. The wig followed. Then the bent posture left him, and once again the old farmer vanished. Adewale stood tall in the lantern light, his face sharpened by fury he was no longer trying to hide. Ayoade watched him pace once the length of the room. "This changes the timeline," he said. "It changes everything." "Yes." He stopped and turned toward her. "Tomorrow we move from observation to infiltration." Ayoade lifted her chin. "I'm listening." Something flickered in his eyes at that. Not surprise, approval, maybe, or the quiet recognition that she was no longer standing outside the problem, waiting to be protected from it. Adewale crossed to the hidden room and motioned for her to follow. Inside, the walls of files and route maps seemed less abstract now. Ayoade no longer saw systems. She saw girls, families, roads that swallowed daughters whole. Adewale spread 3 papers across the desk. "The cooperative," he said, tapping the first. "Your uncle uses it as a clean face. Subsidies, seed distribution, women's registration, community support. That earns trust." He tapped the second. "Transport routes. Deliveries coming in, supplies going out, records altered between village collection points and city storage." Then the third. "Private social events. Engagement introductions. Business dinners. Family protection arrangements. These are harder to trace because they move through personal networks, not company accounts." Ayoade stared at the sheets. "And Zainab," he went still for half a beat. There it was again, that tiny change each time the name entered the room. Not longing, not softness, damage. "She appears near the top of the financial branch," he said. "Not the village recruitment side, the cleanup side, paper restructuring, asset concealment, legal insulation." Ayoade frowned. Meaning men like your uncle gather desperation, and women like Zainab make it look respectable on paper. The answer chilled her. She had imagined the former fiancé as a woman with expensive perfume and polished cruelty, the sort who stole from boardrooms and smiled at funerals. But this was worse. This was a mind capable of laundering evil until it could sit comfortably in public. Adewale watched her closely. If we are right, then Jidiofor is not the top of the chain. He is a broker, a useful one, but not the final hand. Then we cut upward. A small pause. Then very quietly Adewale said, "That is exactly what I intend to do." They worked late into the night. For the first time, Ayoade saw how his hidden life functioned. There were coded notebooks, burner phones, different SIM cards, a list of market women who heard everything. 2 drivers loyal to him alone, 1 widowed school administrator who copied documents for cash and silence, and 3 old supply route managers who still believed in the man who raised him. It was not a glamorous network. It was built from overlooked people, the kind powerful men forgot to fear until too late. And for the first time in her life, Ayoade did not feel like one of the overlooked. She felt useful. By midnight, they had formed a plan. She would attend a charity luncheon in town 3 days later, hosted under the name of a women's empowerment foundation connected to Afalayan Group. Chief Jidiofor was expected there, so were regional managers, donor representatives, and if Adewale's source was correct, Zainab Okiki herself. The event would be public enough for smiles, private enough for whispers. Perfect ground for gathering names, mannerisms, alliances. "How do I get invited?" Ayoade asked. Adewale slid a card toward her. "You already are." She took it and blinked. The invitation was addressed to Mrs. Ayoade Bamidele, spouse of a registered cooperative supplier. Of course, the old farmer's wife was harmless, invisible, a woman no one important would bother to guard their faces around. A bitter smile touched her mouth. "They won't see me coming." No, Adewale said. "They won't." The next 2 days changed her in ways marriage had not. Adewale did not train her like a man shaping a weaker person into his weapon. He trained her like someone sharpening an equal he could not afford to underestimate. He taught her how to notice who entered a room first and who others waited for before speaking, how to watch hands instead of smiles, how to ask simple questions that felt harmless but forced revealing answers, how to repeat a phrase back with slight confusion and let arrogant people explain too much. He also taught her how to leave. "That matters most," he said on the second evening, leaning over the hidden room desk while they reviewed the luncheon seating sketch. "Courage, without exit, becomes sacrifice. And I have had enough women around me asked to prove loyalty by bleeding." Ayoade looked up sharply. His face remained angled toward the paper, but she had heard it. "Not just strategy, memory. Who asked that of you?" she said. He was silent for a long moment. "Then people I trusted. Not enough, but real enough." She did not press. On the morning of the luncheon, she dressed in a cream blouse and a modest green wrapper with gold threading at the hem. Nothing flashy, nothing poor enough to draw contempt too quickly. Her hair was braided simply and tied back low. Adewale studied her once before handing her a small brooch shaped like a leaf. "It holds a recorder," he said. Ayoade stared at it. "You had this the whole time. I hoped I would not need you wearing it. You keep saying things like that as if they soften the rest." A shadow of regret crossed his face. "Do they?" "No." He accepted that with a short nod and pinned the brooch near her collar himself, his fingers careful not to brush her skin longer than necessary. The closeness lasted only seconds, but it altered the air between them. Not romance. Not yet. Something more dangerous: awareness. When she arrived at the luncheon hall in town, the first thing she noticed was perfume. Expensive, layered, suffocating perfume trying to hide the scent of ambition. Round tables filled the room. White cloths, floral centerpieces, polished glasses, donor banners. On stage, a smiling moderator spoke about food security and women-led agricultural futures. At the tables, men who had never carried water in heat nodded gravely, while women with diamonds at their wrists discussed resilience. Ayoade kept her face calm. She moved like she belonged nowhere important, which made people look past her almost immediately. It worked better than any disguise. Chief Gideofor spotted her within minutes. Surprise flashed, then vanished behind charm. He crossed the room with controlled ease, taking her hand lightly enough for others to misread it as family affection. "You are recovering well," he murmured. "And you are aging badly," she replied, smiling. His eyes cooled. Before he could answer, the room shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but heads began to turn toward the entrance. Ayoade followed the movement. A woman had just entered in a fitted ivory suit, dark glasses in one hand, composure in every step. She was not the most heavily dressed person in the room. She did not need to be. The power around her arrived first. Men straightened, women recalculated. Assistants moved half a pace quicker. Zainab Okeke. She was beautiful the way expensive knives were beautiful, clean, gleaming, and made to cut. Ayoade watched Chief Gideofor's smile sharpen with deference. So, that was how the chain ran. Zainab greeted donors first, executives second, then let her gaze sweep the room with practiced boredom. It passed over Ayoade once, returned, paused, only for a second. But a second was enough. Ayoade lowered her eyes, as if humbled by importance, while every nerve in her body screamed that she had just been measured by a woman used to recognizing threats before they spoke. Later, near the drinks table, Ayoade positioned herself close enough to hear without appearing to listen. Chief Gideofor joined Zainab near a floral display. "You accelerated the Ibadan arrangement," Zainab asked without preamble. It became necessary. "Because of the sister." Ayoade's fingers tightened around her glass. Chief Gideofor gave a soft, dismissive laugh. "She is emotional. Nothing more." Zainab took a slow sip of sparkling water. "Emotional women are inconvenient only when men underestimate them." Ayoade almost looked up. Almost. Then came the sentence that changed the room inside her. "The one on the farm," Zainab said, voice quiet and precise. "I want everything on him. The old farmer may not be as irrelevant as he appears." Ayoade's heartbeat slammed against her ribs. They were already circling Adewale, not his true identity. Not yet, but suspicion had begun. Chief Gideofor replied, "If he matters, we will know soon." Zainab's mouth curved. "See that you do. I do not enjoy surprises from the dead." The dead. Ayoade understood at once. Zainab believed Adewale was gone, or had believed it long enough to build comfort around the lie. And now something in the pattern had disturbed her. A waiter passed too close. Ayoade shifted aside, careful, silent, invisible. But invisibility had limits. A hand touched her elbow. She turned. Zainab stood right beside her, now smiling with polished courtesy that never reached her eyes. "I don't believe we've met," she said. Chief Gideofor's face changed almost imperceptibly. For the first time that afternoon, he looked uneasy. Ayoade lowered her gaze just enough. "Ayoade, my husband supplies through the cooperative." Zainab studied her for one long, chilling second. Then she smiled wider. "How lovely," she said. "You don't look forgettable at all." And in that moment, Ayoade understood the truth with cold precision. She had not merely entered the enemy's room. She had been noticed inside it. Ayoade did not leave the luncheon hall immediately. Instinct told her to. Fear begged her to. But fear had never once protected her family from greedy people. Fear had only made predators bolder. So she lowered her eyes, let Zainab's hand fall away from her elbow, and offered the kind of modest smile women used when powerful people noticed them by accident. "Thank you, madam," she said softly. Zainab's gaze stayed on her a second too long. Chief Gideofor stepped in with a polished laugh. She is newly married, still learning how these events work. Ayoade could feel the warning underneath his smooth voice speak. "Less disappear faster. Stop existing in rooms above your rank." But Zainab did not look at him. She was still studying Ayoade. "Newly married women usually look frightened," she said. "You look like you're listening." Ayoade let a flicker of embarrassment touch her face. "When people speak beautifully about helping women, I like to listen." That answer pleased everyone on the surface, and no one underneath it. Zainab smiled, but her eyes remained cool. "Good. Listening is useful." Then she moved on. Just like that. No accusation, no scene, no obvious threat. That made it worse. Ayoade waited 3 more minutes before drifting toward the washroom corridor. Once she was out of the main room, she pressed a hand against the wall and forced herself to breathe slowly. Not because she was weak, because terror that is named becomes easier to command. She touched the leaf-shaped brooch near her collar. Still secure. If the recorder had caught enough of the exchange, then they had something real at last, Zainab's suspicion. Her reference to the dead, the accelerated Ibadan arrangement, and confirmation that Gideofor was answering upward. Maybe not enough to destroy them yet, but enough to begin cutting. A soft vibration came from the cheap phone in her handbag. One message. "Leave in 4 minutes. West exit. Don't use front doors. Adewale." Even in disguise, even outside the hall, he was already moving around the danger. Ayoade straightened and turned toward the service corridor, then froze. Temalola's name flashed across her mind so suddenly and violently that her stomach twisted. Tomorrow. Chief Gideofor had said visitors would come tomorrow. No, not tomorrow anymore. Today had accelerated everything. Zainab was suspicious. Gideofor had been unsettled. Men like that never waited when their comfort was threatened. They closed deals faster. They moved girls sooner. They erased risk. Ayoade pulled out her phone and called Temalola. No answer. She called again. Nothing. A third time. Still nothing. The blood drained from her face. She dialed the neighbor woman next door, the one who sometimes let Temalola borrow salt, the one who watched everything and spoke little. The woman answered on the second ring, already breathless. Ayoade, she whispered. Where are you? Ayoade's mouth went dry. Why a pause? Then the woman said the words that ripped the floor from under her. They took your sister an hour ago. For one terrible second, Ayoade heard nothing else. Only the roaring inside her skull. What do you mean, took 2 cars came? Your uncle dressed her like she was going to a ceremony. She was crying. Your mother kept saying it was for her own good. Your brother slapped the gate when she tried to run. Ayoade's knees nearly gave way. The woman's voice dropped further. I thought maybe you knew. I thought maybe this was arranged already. No, this was what happened when girls were treated like signatures and livestock and blessings wrapped around violence. Things moved while decent people were still deciding whether to call them evil. Which direction, Ayoade demanded. Ibadan Road, I think. I only saw the cars turning. The call ended, but the horror did not. Ayoade stood in the corridor with the phone in her hand and suddenly understood that every careful plan they had built could collapse under one simple truth. They had run out of time. She was already moving before the next thought formed. Through the west service exit, down the back steps, across the narrow alley, behind the hall where catering vans were parked in a row. Adewale emerged from between 2 vehicles before she reached the gate. He was dressed as an event supplier, now, cap low, dark shirt, clipboard in hand, but one look at her face erased the disguise from his eyes. What happened? They took Temalola. Everything in him went still. When, an hour ago? Maybe less. 2 cars. Ibadan Road. For the first time since she had known him, Adewale did not answer immediately. His silence was not hesitation. It was the sound of a mind recalculating 10 dangers at once. Then he took her arm, not gently, not harshly, just decisively, and led her to a plain, dark pickup parked behind the catering tents. Get in. They were on the road in seconds. The city thinned around them in waves of concrete kiosks, bus stops, and red dust. Ayoade called Temalola again and again until the phone went dead. Then she called her mother. No answer. Kunle. Rejected. Her uncle. Switched off. They planned it, she said, voice shaking. The whole time I was inside that hall, they were moving her. Yes. You sound too calm. Adewale kept his eyes on the road. Would you prefer panic? She hated the question because the answer was no. I prefer my sister alive. So do I. His voice changed on the last word, enough for her to turn and look at him. This was not detached strategy anymore, not just investigation. He was angry too, not abstractly, personally. Adewale picked up one of the burner phones from the console and made 3 rapid calls. To a transport manager near the toll junction, to a woman at a private clinic who owed him loyalty, to a driver named Bashiru, who monitored routes leading into Ibadan estates used for family introductions and quiet financial meetings. He gave no dramatic speeches, just names, plate fragments, route predictions, and clipped instructions. Find the cars, quietly. Don't intervene until I arrive. Keep eyes on them. Ayoade listened, half dazed, half burning. You had people ready for this, she said. I had people ready for many things. I should have moved sooner on your sister. The admission startled her. No deflection, no excuse, just responsibility taken late. She turned back to the windshield as dry fields blurred by. They'll make her think it's too late. They always do that. They make girls feel the road is already a decision. Adewale glanced at her. Did they do that to you? A bitter laugh escaped her. Not with cars, with prayers, with debt. With everyone staring until saying no felt like killing your own family. His hand tightened on the steering wheel. They reached the toll junction just as Bashiru called back. Adewale put the phone on speaker. 2 black cars matching the description entered the old Olumo Guest Estate Road, Bashiru said. Private compound at the far end, the one sometimes used for engagement dinners. Men at the gate. One of the girls tried to get out when the first car stopped. They forced her back in. Ayoade made a sound that did not feel human. Adewale's voice became pure steel. Stay outside visual range. No one moves until I call. He ended the call and turned off the main road without slowing. The estate road was narrower, lined with high hedges and imported palm trees trying too hard to look wealthy. By the time the walled compound appeared ahead, the sun had dropped low enough to turn every window gold. Ayoade saw the gate, saw 1 car inside already, saw another just beyond the entry arch, and through the half-open rear door of the second car she saw a flash of familiar blue fabric. Temalola's dress. Ayoade reached for the door handle before the pickup had fully stopped. Adewale caught her wrist. No, she's there, I know. Then let me out. His eyes locked onto hers hard and unyielding. If you run at that gate screaming, they will drag her deeper inside before you cross 10 steps. Think. She tore her arm free. She is my sister, not a strategy. And if you love her, act like you plan to get her back alive. The words hit like cold water thrown across fire. Ayoade stopped breathing for 1 beat. 2. He was right. She hated him for being right in that moment, but he was. Adewale reached into the back seat and pulled out a clean jacket, dark glasses and a leather folder. When he looked at her again, his face had changed into something colder, sharper, almost frightening. Not Bamidele, not the hidden man at the farm, someone else, someone from the world that built gates like these and knew exactly how to walk through them. What are you doing? She asked. His mouth hardened. Buying us 30 seconds of confusion. He handed her the folder. Stay low until I call. If I tell you to move, go straight to Temalola and do not stop for anyone. Ayoade stared at him. The late sun cut across his face, turning his features into lines of command and danger. In that light, it was suddenly easy to imagine him not as the man who had hidden in fields, but as the billionaire others once followed without question. He stepped out of the pickup and put on the glasses. Then, without disguise, without beard, without stoop, Adewale Afolayan walked straight toward the gate like a man who owned the road beneath his feet. The guards noticed him. One frowned. The other went pale. And in that suspended, impossible second before chaos began, Ayoade understood the truth they had both been avoiding. This was no longer just about rescuing Temalola. Because the moment Adewale revealed himself at that gate, the dead man Zainab thought she had buried was stepping back into the war alive. Ectothuk PHN8, Typetis Usuvi TD 1000 to 1200 T Theo Quai DNH, thought for a second, PHN9. The guards froze for exactly 1 second. That second was enough. Enough for disbelief to break discipline. Enough for one of them to glance toward the house instead of blocking the path. Enough for Adewale Afolayan to reach the gate before either man remembered that dead men were not supposed to arrive in person. Open it, he said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The authority in it was not theatrical. It was old, trained, and accustomed to obedience. The younger guard stepped back without thinking. The older one recovered first and moved toward the intercom panel near the wall. Adewale caught his wrist. Not violently, just firmly enough to say two things at once. "I know what you were about to do, and you are too late." "Open," he repeated. Inside the pickup, Ayoade could barely breathe. She saw the guards' confusion. She saw recognition begin to bloom where certainty had been. One muttered something under his breath, "Sir," or maybe "How," and that was all it took. The gate slid inward with a low, metallic groan. Adewale turned his head once, barely enough for Ayoade to see the signal. "Move!" She was out of the truck before the gate had fully opened. The world narrowed at once, the sharp gravel under her sandals, the evening heat trapped inside the compound walls, the smell of polished cars and flowering hedges, the distant throb of music from inside the house. Somewhere ahead, a woman laughed too loudly. Somewhere else, a glass shattered. And there, near the side entrance, between two men in matching dark suits, stood Temalola. Her braid had been redone too tightly. Powder dulled her face. Gold earrings, too heavy for her ears, dragged at her lobes. She looked less like a girl being honored and more like a child dressed for sale. One of the suited men had his hand around her upper arm. Ayoade ran. Temi. Her sister's head jerked up. For one stunned heartbeat, hope lit her whole face so brightly it hurt to see. Then the man holding her arm tightened his grip and began dragging her toward the doorway. Ayoade hit him with all the force fear had been saving inside her body. The folder Adewale had handed her struck his shoulder first, then her weight slammed into his chest. He stumbled backward with a curse, losing his hold on Temalola long enough for the girl to twist free and throw herself at her sister. Ayoade caught her arms, wrapping around her so hard both of them nearly fell. "It's okay," she gasped. "I'm here. I've got you. I've got you." Temalola was shaking so badly she could barely speak. "They said if I cried they would send me back and make it worse." Ayoade's vision blurred with fury. Behind them, shouting erupted near the gate. More men were spilling out of the house now. One of them barked orders at the guards. Another recognized Adewale and actually stopped walking as if his mind had tripped over reality. Then Chief Jidiofor appeared on the front steps. He looked magnificent in cream robes and polished shoes, like a man dressed for blessing, not betrayal. For one split second, pure shock stripped the charm from his face. Adewale, he breathed. There it was. Recognition. Not suspicion. Not maybe. He knew. Adewale removed his dark glasses slowly. "You look disappointed." Jidiofor recovered with astonishing speed. "On the contrary, the dead returning is excellent for business. It clarifies inheritance." Even now, Ayoade thought, even with a child trembling in fear and armed men losing control of the compound, he still spoke in transactions. Adewale stepped further into the drive. It also clarifies conspiracy. More figures emerged behind Jidiofor regional managers. Private guests, 2 legal aides, and then walking into the light as if she had choreographed the moment herself, Zainab Okike. Her expression changed only once when she saw Adewale. Only in the eyes. Not grief, not relief. Rage. Cold, surgical rage layered over a composure so perfect most people would have missed it. But Ayoade saw it. Saw the instant calculation. Saw the future plans being torn apart and rebuilt behind that calm face. Adewale Zainab said, voice smooth as glass, "You should have stayed buried." Temalola clutched Ayoade harder. Ayoade pulled her a step behind her own body. Adewale's face did not move. "And you should have been smarter with paper trails." Several heads turned at that. Good Ayoade thought through the pounding in her blood. Let them hear it. Let doubt begin before the evidence lands. Jidiofor laughed too loudly. "What is this performance?" A private family engagement disturbed by a delusional widower of old grudges. Family Ayoade shot back, voice cutting across the courtyard. "You drugged her with lies, dressed her against her will, and locked her inside a car." The nearest legal aid went visibly still. One of the guests, an older woman wrapped in expensive aso oke, frowned at Temalola's tear-streaked face. then at the men positioned too close to the doorway. The moral choreography of the evening was beginning to crack. Zainab saw it too. She turned slightly, shifting from private power to public elegance. "Let's be careful," she said, as if soothing children. "These are emotional accusations during a sensitive family negotiation." Ayoade almost laughed. There it was again, that polished language that tried to bleach violence into civility. Before she could answer, a line of black SUVs swept into the outer drive. Not Gideofor's cars, not Zainab's either. The lead vehicle stopped hard. Doors opened. Men in dark suits stepped out, followed by a middle-aged woman in a navy dress carrying a leather portfolio and a man with a camera rig slung over one shoulder. Adewale did not look surprised. Ayoade did. He had called more than transport managers. The woman in navy crossed the courtyard quickly. "Mr. Afolayan," Counsel Adewale said. She nodded once, then took in the scene at a glance. Temalola's condition, the guards, the guests, Zainab Gideofor. The half-open doors to the estate house. Then her gaze sharpened into legal precision. "Recording begins now," she said. The cameraman lifted his rig. Everything changed. Gideofor's smile slipped. Zainab's posture tightened by half an inch. The guests, who might have tolerated ambiguity, suddenly realized this was no longer a private mess, but an event with consequences. The woman in navy opened her portfolio. "For the record, I am Barrister Abimbola Eze, counsel to the Afolayan estate, and acting representative for ongoing financial and criminal review. We are here in response to a minor's unlawful transport for coerced marital arrangement cross-linked to existing evidence of procurement fraud, shell beneficiary transfers, and coercive family brokerage." No one spoke, because once evil is translated into formal language, its excuses start losing oxygen. Ayoade felt Temalola trembling behind her. She squeezed her sister's hand and lifted her chin. Now, Adewale looked at her just once, and she understood. Ayoade reached up to her collar, unclipped the leaf-shaped brooch, and handed it to Barrister Eze. It recorded the luncheon, she said. Zainab mentioned the Ibadan arrangement, called the man on the farm suspicious, and said she did not like surprises from the dead. Zainab's face changed at last. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough for everyone watching to know the evening had shifted away from her control. "That proves nothing," she said coolly. "Of course," Barrister Eze replied, "which is why we also brought transaction extracts, charity laundering trails, and 2 sworn testimonies already filed under seal." She withdrew printed pages. Gideofor stepped forward for the first time with real aggression in his body. "You can't ambush people with paperwork and cameras and call it truth." Adewale's voice turned colder than the gravel underfoot. "No. Truth was ambushed long before I arrived. This is recovery." And then, before anyone else could move, another voice rang out from the gate. "I can testify, too." Every head turned. A battered taxi had just pulled in behind the legal vehicles. Out stepped Mama Saad from the cooperative, her blue head wrap bright in the falling dusk. Beside her came the neighbor woman from Ayoade's street, and behind them, stepping down slowly with the help of a cane, was an elderly man in a faded driver's jacket with watchful eyes. Adewale straightened. "Mr. Olabisi." The old man nodded. "I drove your father the night he died." A silence fell so deep it seemed to swallow the music still playing uselessly inside the house. Zainab's control sharpened into something dangerous. "This is absurd." "No," the old driver said, voice shaking only with age. "Absurd was calling it an accident after I watched them tamper with the route orders. I stayed quiet because quiet men live longer. But I am old now and girls keep disappearing." The words struck the courtyard like thunder. Mama Sade lifted her chin. "And women keep signing papers they cannot read because men like him." She pointed at Gideofor. "Tell them help is coming." The older guest in a sooke stepped away from Zainab, as if contact itself might stain her. One of the regional managers began backing toward his car. The cameraman caught everything. Ayoade realized then that this was no longer a rescue in progress. This was a public collapse. Jidiofor saw it too. His gaze flicked toward the side path. "Escape!" Adewale noticed the glance and said without turning, "If he runs, stop him." Two of the men from the SUVs moved at once. Jidiofor bolted anyway. He made it 5 steps before they caught him. The sight broke something open in the compound. One of the legal aides started crying. Another guest cursed under her breath. A regional accountant, sweating visibly, blurted that he had only followed instructions from Lagos and did not know girls were involved. Barrister Eze told him to keep speaking. Zainab, however, did not run. She stood perfectly still, eyes on Adewale. "You think this is victory?" she said softly. "This is inconvenience." Adewale's expression did not change. "It's a beginning." Ayoade looked at her sister's tear-stained face, at the file clutched in Barrister Easy's hand, at Jidiofor restrained near the hedge, at the witnesses gathered by courage and exhaustion and moral disgust. No, she thought, not beginning. Payback. Because for the first time since she had been dressed like a debt and sold under blessings, the right people were afraid in public. And this time, no one was looking away. By sunrise, the story had already begun escaping the walls built to contain it. Not through rumors first, through records, through footage, through signatures and testimonies, and a camera that had captured the wrong people standing too close to the wrong kind of silence. The private estate where Temalola had nearly been delivered into a respectable-looking nightmare no longer belonged to whispers. Barrister Abimbola Eze had moved before dawn, filing emergency protections for Temalola. Preserving witness statements, freezing linked access requests to several shell-controlled trust accounts, and pushing the first wave of evidence into channels too formal to smother quietly. By morning, 3 phones were ringing non-stop inside the hidden room at the farm. By noon, 2 board members from Afolayan Group had requested an urgent closed session. By afternoon, one regional paper had published a cautious headline about questions surrounding family brokerage and misuse of agricultural charity structures. Questions. Ayoade had learned that powerful people often called truth questions when they still hoped it might die politely. But truth had teeth now. Temalola slept most of the morning in the small room that had once belonged only to Ayoade. She had cried herself empty sometime before dawn, and then collapsed into a dense, exhausted sleep that looked almost unnatural in its stillness. Ayoade sat beside her for a long time, smoothing her sister's hair back from her forehead, feeling the delayed shock arrive in waves. She had brought her back. Not safely, not cleanly, not before damage was done, but back. That mattered. In the main room, Adewale stood by the window in a pressed dark shirt, looking less like the man from the farm, and more like the one the world had once known before it believed him buried. Even in stillness he seemed changed by disclosure. Hidden grief had turned into visible command. The softness he had been forced to wear was gone. In its place stood something steadier, sharper, almost forbidding. And yet, when he turned and saw Ayoade in the doorway, his face shifted. Not much, but enough. "How is she?" he asked. "Sleeping." He nodded. "Good." The simple word carried real relief. Ayoade noticed that now. She noticed everything now, not because she was becoming suspicious again, but because survival had trained her to hear what most people missed. On the table between them lay 3 newspapers, 2 sealed evidence envelopes, and 1 printed notice from Afolayan Group calling for an extraordinary board hearing in Lagos. Ayoade looked at it. "Today, yes, and Zainab will be there. She insists on it." Ayoade gave a cold, humorless laugh. "Of course she does." Adewale stepped closer to the table. "Jidiofor has started naming names in exchange for leverage." "Coward?" "Yes," Adewale said. "But useful." The answer startled a brief, bitter smile from her. Only a few days earlier, she might have hated the dryness of it. Now she understood. Evil had to be named before it could be judged, and sometimes the weak link in a chain was the one most desperate to save himself. "What about my parents?" she asked. A pause. Adewale did not soften the answer. "They are being questioned. Kunle too." Ayoade looked down at the grain of the wooden table. There it was, the ache she had expected. Not because they were innocent, not because they deserved pity, but because grief does not wait for goodness before it arrives. She felt no desire to run to them, no instinct to undo what they had chosen, no fantasy that they had loved her correctly and simply lost their way. But still there was pain. Pain that the people who should have protected her had forced her to become evidence against them. Adewale's voice came quieter. "You do not need to go to Lagos." She looked up sharply. "Yes, I do. You have already done enough." "No," Ayoade said, and the word came with surprising force. "That is exactly how men like them survive. Women do enough in private, then disappear when it is time for public truth." His gaze stayed on hers. She went on. "I was sold in front of witnesses. I was humiliated in front of witnesses. My sister was almost handed over in front of witnesses. They used public respectability as a weapon, then let them be answered in public too." Something in his face changed then, not resistance, not concern, but a kind of quiet acknowledgement that he had just heard the final version of her decision. He inclined his head once. "All right." The hearing took place in Lagos under chilled air conditioning and polished glass, the kind of room designed to make corruption look efficient. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a skyline of money and ambition. On the walls hung framed photographs of agricultural innovation programs, women's rural enterprise grants, youth farming empowerment schemes, bright, noble images now stained by what had moved underneath them. Ayoade entered beside Adewale and Barrister Eze, wearing a plain navy dress and no jewelry, except the small earrings Temalola had chosen for her that morning. She had not dressed for battle or forgiveness. She had dressed to be impossible to ignore. The room noticed her immediately. So did Zainab. The woman sat near the far end of the long board table in a cream suit so precise it might have been armor. Her expression remained controlled, but Ayoade no longer mistook composure for safety. She had seen the machinery underneath. She knew what beauty without conscience looked like now. Several directors stood when Adewale entered. Not all of them. Interesting. Fear, loyalty, resentment, calculation. They moved across the room in waves. Then came the chairperson, a silver-haired man, whose public statements had once spoken grandly of ethics, sustainability, and national development. Today he looked as if he had aged 10 years in one night. "Adewale," he said carefully. "Chairman." The hearing began with formalities, then pretense, then fracture. Barrister Eze spoke first. She laid out the evidence with the precision of a surgeon, falsified cooperative disbursement trails, diverted seed and subsidy funds. Ghost warehousing fees, personal enrichment through shell vendors, coercive marriage support channels, disguised as family intervention and witness testimony. Tying Chief Gideofor to multiple transactional introductions involving vulnerable girls and debt-strapped households. No one interrupted at first. Then came the luncheon audio. Zainab's voice cool and unmistakable. "The one on the farm. I want everything on him. I do not enjoy surprises from the dead." Silence followed it, the kind that strips varnish from rooms. One director removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. Another looked directly at Zainab as if seeing her clearly for the first time. A woman from the Social Impact Division went pale when the witness testimonies about coerced girls were read aloud. Zainab did not flinch. When her turn came, she stood gracefully. "What you are hearing," she said, "is a coordinated emotional performance built from grief, family disorder, and selective paperwork. A private family matter has been manipulated to contaminate a corporate succession dispute. Ayoade almost admired the elegance of the lie. Almost, Zainab continued. Yes? I questioned a suspicious rural figure connected to unusual movement. Any responsible executive would. Yes, Chief Judeofor operated near cooperative channels, but proximity is not control. And yes, a distressed young woman is making accusations in the aftermath of family conflict. Her eyes moved to Ayoade, then cool and slicing. Pain is real. But pain is not proof. There it was. The oldest trick. Turn suffering into unreliability. Turn truth-telling into instability. Turn the wounded into the weak link. A few days earlier, those words might have landed. Today, Ayoade rose before anyone could speak. Barrister Ize looked at her once, asking without words. Ayoade answered by standing straighter. She walked to the center of the room. Every eye followed. For one brief second, she saw herself as they might see her, not from Lagos high society, not polished by elite schools, not protected by wealth, not trained in boardroom language, just a woman from a family that had tried to price her. The kind men like Judeofor overlooked and women like Zainab dismissed until too late. Good. Let that be what they saw. My pain is not your proof, Ayoade said, looking directly at Zainab. Your records are. The room stilled. Ayoade went on, voice calm and clear. You are right about one thing. Family disorder is part of this story. My parents sold me under the language of sacrifice. My brother helped, my uncle profited, and people like you gave that ugliness clean corridors to walk through. A muscle jumped once in Zainab's jaw. Ayoade kept going. You hide behind systems because systems do not cry. Systems do not bleed in public. Systems do not arrive trembling in powder and borrowed earrings at private compounds. Girls do. No one moved. Temalola is not a theory, Ayoade said. I am not a succession tactic. We are what your paperwork touched when it stopped being numbers. That landed deeper than any shouting could have. Because now the boardroom had what it never really wanted, a moral image too human to file away. One of the directors asked for the witness packet again. Another demanded independent review of all community-linked disbursement structures for the past 3 years. A third, who had remained silent too long, finally said, If even half of this holds, we are facing criminal exposure across multiple jurisdictions. Zainab's control tightened visibly. Adewale spoke then for the first time since the hearing began. My father built this company to feed people, not to turn hunger into leverage. The room turned toward him. I disappeared because someone killed him and expected fear to finish the work, he said. I returned quietly because rot speaks freely when it thinks grief has won. You now have a choice. Protect names or protect what remains worth saving. No theatrics, no pounding fist, no grand speech, just truth delivered without needing approval. And that was the moment the room broke. Not loudly. Institutionally. Motions were called. Temporary authority shifted. Emergency external audit ratified. Executive access restrictions imposed. Zainab's credentials were suspended pending criminal review. 3 regional channels were frozen on the spot. Chief Judeofor's cooperation request was accepted only under full disclosure terms. A child protection referral was formally attached to the proceedings. Zainab stood through all of it like a queen watching lesser people misunderstand her brilliance. Only once as security approached to escort her from the executive floor did she look at Adewale with open hatred. Then at Ayoade. This is not justice, she said softly. This is interruption. Ayoade held her gaze. No, she replied. This is consequence. Afterward, when the room had emptied and the adrenaline began to drain, The quiet felt almost unreal. Lagos spread beyond the windows in afternoon light. Cars crawled below like threads of metal. Somewhere inside the building, assistants were already whispering, calls were already being made, alliances were already being abandoned. But for the first time in a long time, the collapsing structure was not falling on Ayoade. She stood near the glass, breathing slowly when Adewale came to stand beside her. Neither spoke at first. Then he said, "Temalola is safe at the house. Barrister Ize arranged temporary protection orders. The school administrator's sister will stay with her too." Ayoade nodded, and only then realized how exhausted she was. He looked at her not as a strategist, not as a savior, not as the man who had once stood behind a false beard and called himself Bamidele, as Adewale. Entirely. "I owe you an apology that can't be repaired by gratitude," he said. She turned toward him. "For the marriage," he said. "For the lies. For deciding risk on your behalf before I knew the cost would be carried in your body." She studied his face. There was no self-defense left in it now. Only truth. "That apology matters," she said quietly. "But it doesn't erase what happened." "I know. And I cannot become the kind of woman who forgets pain just because the man who caused part of it turned out to be good in other ways." Something like relief moved through his features. Not because she had forgiven him, because she had spoken honestly. That he said maybe one of the reasons He stopped. Ayoade waited. Adewale exhaled once and began again. "I do not want another transaction between us," he said. "No duty, no debt, no gratitude mistaken for attachment. So I will say only this when all of this settles: if you choose a life nowhere near mine, I will help build it and stand far enough away not to poison it. If you choose to remain near me, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you are never again treated like something that can be arranged." The words entered her slowly. Not because they were unclear, because they were the first words from a man that asked nothing, while offering everything cleanly. Ayoade looked out at the city again, then back at him. The road from forced bride to this room had been built from humiliation, danger, grief, and fire. Nothing about it was romantic. Nothing about it should be softened into a fairy tale. But healing was not the absence of what had happened. Healing was the return of choice. And for the first time since her family had put a price on her life, Ayoade had won. Weeks later, the second wedding took place quietly at the farm. Not because spectacle was impossible, but because peace had become precious. The fields were green after rain. Women from the cooperative came in bright wrappers and laughter that held no mockery. Mama Sade sat in the front row like a queen who had outlived too many fools. Temalola wore yellow and smiled without fear in her face. Barrister Ize came late from court and stayed long enough to eat pepper soup with both hands. Even some of the men who had once looked past Bamidele. The farmer now stood humbled beneath the truth of who had been among them all along. Ayoade walked toward Adewale without being pushed, without being traded, without being told what her obedience was worth. And when he reached for her hand this time, it was not to claim what had been purchased. It was to receive what had finally been freely given. Together they later founded a rural protection trust for girls, at risk of forced marriage, debt, trafficking, and coercive family arrangements. It funded schooling, emergency relocation, legal support, and women-led agricultural cooperatives that could not be quietly turned into hunting grounds. Temalola returned to school. Kunla faced charges and public disgrace. Ireti and Sanya lost the right to decide any daughter's future, but were not erased from mercy. They were simply never again allowed to confuse mercy with access. And in the house where lies had once hidden behind old walls, something else began to grow. Not innocence, something stronger. A life rebuilt by truth, guarded by choice, and made gentle again only after justice had done its work. A story like this leaves a hard lesson behind. Sometimes the deepest betrayal does not come from strangers, but from the very people who believe blood gives them ownership. Family is not sacred because it shares your name. It becomes sacred only when it protects your dignity, your safety, and your right to choose. When love is replaced by control, sacrifice becomes exploitation. When silence protects cruelty, silence becomes part of the crime. But this story also leaves hope. A broken beginning does not have to become a broken life. The moment a person tells the truth, even with shaking hands, the future begins to shift. Healing is not pretending the wound never existed. Healing is refusing to let the wound decide what kind of person you become. Ayoade did not heal by forgetting. She healed by choosing differently, loving differently, and building a world where other girls would not have to survive what she did. If this story moved you, tell me where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. And tell me honestly, should people who sell out their own family ever be forgiven? If you love emotional stories filled with justice, truth, and healing, subscribe and stay with me.